don't know if this is true or not, that some scientists are trying to figure out a way to block the sun to try to slow down global warming.
Yeah, it's a measure of the feeling of desperation that some of them feel.
Are they really thinking they could do that?
Well, some of them are seriously proposing, and I think it's completely nuts.
Yeah.
You put another kind of pollution, sulfur dioxide, up to orbit, cover the atmosphere. The sky won't be really blue in the way it is now anymore, but it would block out some of the sun's heat so that we wouldn't have to take the difficult steps to stop spewing all this global warming pollution into the atmosphere. And of course, there are a lot of problems with what they're proposing.
You could actually spray sulfuric acid in the stratosphere 20 kilometers over our head and use that to stop the planet warming up in a ugly tech fix.
You can spray something into the atmosphere to change.
Spray pollution into the atmosphere to stop it warming.
How do you do this?
You'd start with a fleet of modified business jets and say 20,000 tons of sulfuric acid into the stratosphere every year. And each year you have to put a little more. And this doesn't, in the long run, mean that you can forget about cutting emissions. We will need to rein in emissions.
No, we'll get to it eventually. But in the meantime, we're shrouding the Earth in sulfuric acid.
So people are terrified about talking about this because they're scared that it will prevent us cutting emissions.
Right, and also that it's sulfuric acid.
We put 50 million tons of sulfuric acid in the air now as pollution, and it kills 1 million people a year worldwide.
Okay, but it'll be better if we put more in.
We're talking about 1% of that.
1% more, we're just killing 10,000 more people.
You can do math.
What happens to the sulfuric acid after it's sprayed? Does it just stay up there?
No, it rains down, but it's a tiny addition to what we're already doing.
Is there any possible way this could come back to bite us in the end?
It actually turns out to be an old idea. This was known since President Johnson.
You ever look at those planes up there? They have contrails behind them. Maybe all those planes are the contrails. Maybe they're actually spraying chemicals into the atmosphere right now and Uncle Sam isn't telling us.
Seems extremely unlikely.
That the United States is not telling something to its citizens? That seems extremely likely to me. Read the newspaper. I think they might have your idea already.
This geoengineering idea in its simplest form is basically the following. You could put fine particles, say sulfuric acid particles, sulfates, into the upper atmosphere, the stratosphere, where they'd reflect away sunlight and cool the planet. There's lots of mystery in the details, and there's some bad side effects, like it partially destroys the ozone layer, and I'll get to that in a minute, but it clearly cools down. And one other thing, it's fast. I guess the thing I haven't said about this is it is absurdly cheap. It's amazing how we can affect the planet. The one thing about this is it gives us extraordinary leverage. This improved science and engineering will, whether we like it or not, give us more and more leverage to affect the planet, to control the planet, to give us weather and climate control, not because we plan it, not because we want it, just because science delivers it to us bit by bit.
What is geoengineering?
It's really two very different things. One is ways that we would alter the amount of sunlight the Earth absorbs, and so cool the planet, partly offsetting the effects of carbon in the atmosphere, and that's called solar radiation management, or in some technocratic way, SRM. And the other one is to take carbon out of the atmosphere, so-called carbon dioxide removal.
Before we get on to solar radiation management, let me ask you about the carbon dioxide removal. A Royal Society report here in the United Kingdom back in 2009 said that no method of carbon dioxide removal has yet been demonstrated to be effective at an affordable cost with acceptable environmental impacts, and they only work to reduce temperatures over very long timescales.
I think that's exactly right, and I can say that both as an author of that report and as somebody running a startup company trying to capture CO2 from the air.
Before we get into the pros and cons of it, how solar radiation management might work.
Conceptually, it's simple. The doing it is not the hard part, but you could use aircraft or other methods to deliver literally tons or millions of tons of very small reflective aerosols, tiny particles, say, to the upper atmosphere.
Spraying them out at a high altitude.
Correct.
Isn't one of the problems with the climate and studying the climate is that it's incredibly difficult to know exactly how it works. It is very difficult to model.
Sure, it's impossible to know exactly, but you can still learn a lot. So we actually ran a survey almost a year ago now that took data, high quality data, from 1,000 people in the UK, Canada, and the US to try and understand public support for research on these technologies and what kind of political leanings influence people's decision to be for or against. And in fact, we found pretty broad support for research.
But that particular opinion survey that you're talking about, it also came up with the finding that 64% of subjects agree that humans should not be manipulating nature in the way suggested by solar radiation management.
Exactly.
Well, that would suggest that there isn't particularly broad support at the moment for the theory behind this.
There's not broad support for doing it, and I think that's quite a healthy thing. I mean, I'm one of the people who, maybe starting 20 years ago, most helped to open the door to get public conversation going on this thing.
How do you think, in that case, the public can be convinced, given that there is, as we saw with this project in Britain, tremendous skepticism, even about research at what you say is a very, very benign level?
Public opinion will evolve over a long time, and from my point of view, the goal is to try and make that public opinion be able to be shaped by facts as well as possible, and also shaped by people's values. It's not to promote this. So actually,
well, it is in part to promote this. I mean, you're a great enthusiast for this, and as you said, you have your own private company, which is...
my private company works on a very different part of it, which doesn't suffer from these governance challenges.
But it is all to do with the issue of geoengineering. I mean, you know, it's an incredibly sensitive topic.
I actually don't think my job is to promote it. My job is to help clear thinking and clear knowledge about the tools we have to regulate climate risk, among them this one. And I'm perfectly prepared to find that results show that we should never do this. So if it works, and again, we don't know it does, it provides some protection in the near term.
Isn't there a problem, though, that you could end up with different effects in different parts of the world? I mean, you could, for example, find that although you're reducing the amount of sunlight and the amount, therefore, that the Earth is warming up, rainfall is affected in different ways in different parts of the world.
Absolutely. Essentially, the scientists and technocrats, including myself, I guess, are helping to invent a thermostat knob. But it's much easier to invent the knob than to figure out who should be in charge of it in a world with many states.
No, indeed, and I want to come on to the governance, but I want to ask specifically about the science of this, which is how far can you tell whether the effects of solar radiation management are then going to cause perhaps a catastrophic loss of rainfall in a certain part of the world. At the moment, it seems to be hazy, this.
I think it's not as hazy as that. So using exactly the same climate models as we've used to estimate the problems with CO2 in the atmosphere, the underlying climate problem, we've applied those same models and same techniques to look at this. And the results so far, I have to say, look pretty good. That's why we're paying any attention to it.
Richard Branson himself, who owns the Virgin Airline Group, was quoted back in 2009 in the New York Times saying, if we could come up with a geoengineering answer to this problem, we could carry on flying our planes and driving our cars.
Is going to cost a lot of money.
And yet I mean, let's be clear here, you and your company are after Branson's money.
The cheapest thing to do is to use the atmosphere as a waste dump. And if we want to stop doing that, we must have laws that restrict the ability to use the atmosphere as a waste dump.
My question is, are you not concerned that you and your company, Carbon Engineering, is looking for money from people like Richard Branson? It's funded, I think, in part by Murray Edwards, who is a key figure in tar sands, which is seen as one of the dirtiest fuels on the planet.
It is.
Are you not slightly concerned about the people who you're getting into bed with?
I'm happy to take money from serious folks who have a broad set of interests. No problem. First of all, I should say, for work on SRM, on these very high leverage technologies that have security concerns, I believe there should be no private action, there should be no for-profit action. I believe it would make sense for SRM to actually restrict or eliminate the possibility of patenting.
Isn't your company involved in several patents at the moment?
This is the difference. So for capturing CO2 from the air, that's an encapsulated small technology, which can be regulated by the normal laws. It's inherently expensive, so there's no risk of sucking all the CO2 out of the air because it costs so much. Any technology you have that removes CO2 will have local risks, maybe unacceptable risks, but those risks can be managed by the normal local risk management we have. So I think that I'm happy to see private action on cutting emissions by making solar power or electric vehicles or capture from air. I'm not happy to see public action on technologies with this huge leverage, like putting particles in the stratosphere.
I'll tell you a little bit about some new work we've been doing, thinking about how you actually might put aerosols in the stratosphere. The novel method we've been thinking about, or it's not novel at all, it's actually exactly what happens from aircraft contrails, is that we put a condensable, a few megatons a year of sulfur would be enough to produce sort of 4 watts per square meter radiative forcing directly out of the back of an aircraft. There's a huge literature in the nanofabrication world about making fine particles from low vapor pressure gas, and there's nothing very hard in terms of aircraft engineering. If you go to aircraft engineers, and we've done this, they say that would be easy, we could do this if you want us to. We've mostly thought about sulfur, and there's a lot of good reasons to think about sulfur, because sulfur's what nature does, at least in this version of the model. Is if you put sulfur in continuously, you actually get a remarkably ineffective result. Nevertheless, there might be some good reasons to think about alumina. The big deal really is that alumina has 4 times the volumetric rate as sulfur, but roughly 16 times less the coagulation rate. So you could get away, we think, with much smaller mass flux. The little picture is from a nanofabrication study, which shows you can make high-quality alumina particles just by spraying alumina vapor out, which oxidizes. So it certainly seems pretty cost-effective and easy to do this with aircraft that are not very different from conventional aircraft. High-class business jets like the Gulfstream have wing designs that are very efficient. So with slightly different engine choices, they can easily deliver large weights up to sort of 20 kilometers or a little higher. And you could do that by either building new versions of these aircraft or even re-engineering existing aircraft. We have engineering firms that can do it. So you go to an engineering firm and you want this done. They don't say this is hard or unusual. They say, okay, yes, we could do it. Once you realize you can make things by direct condensation from vapor, then all sorts of different compounds are possible. But it's much, much harder to actually figure out the environmental risks and effectiveness of these new methods than it is to cook them up. Aerosol geoengineering looks like it is so cheap that the cost is basically not going to be an issue. That means that implementation decisions will be risk-to-risk decisions. So the key factors are this is fast, it's cheap, and it's inherently imperfect. It cannot compensate for the amount of CO2 in the air. On a commercial basis, I do absolutely no proprietary commercial work on solar radiation management because I think such work would be wrong.
Solar geoengineering refers to a set of technologies that could allow humanity to deliberately increase the planet's reflectivity, and so partially offsetting the temperature changes and other climate changes that come from the accumulation of carbon dioxide. Solar geoengineering can be very inexpensive. The cost might be something like $10 billion for the whole planet. That sounds like a lot of money each year, but in fact that's something like 1/10,000th of global GDP.
This next story is so unbelievable, we didn't think it could possibly be true. But after receiving thousands of records and declassified reports from the Army, it's confirmed that during the Cold War, the United States military conducted secret tests on unsuspecting people in the city of St. Louis.
Lisa Martino Taylor's life work has been to uncover details of the Army's ultra-secret military experiments carried out in St. Louis and other cities during the 1950s and 60s.
This study was secretive for a reason. They didn't have volunteers stepping up and saying, yeah, I'll breathe zinc cadmium sulfide with radioactive particles.
These Army archive pictures show how the tests were done in Corpus Christi, Texas in the 1960s. In Texas, planes were used to drop the chemical, but in St. Louis, the Army placed chemical sprayers on buildings and station wagons. City officials were kept in the dark about the tests. The Cold War cover story was that the Army was testing smoke screens to protect cities from a Russian attack.
Clearly, they went to great lengths to deceive people.
By making hundreds of Freedom of Information Act requests, she uncovered once classified documents that confirmed the spraying of zinc cadmium sulfide. The greatest concentration of this compound was sprayed near the Pruitt-Igoe housing complex just south of downtown St. Louis. It was home to 10,000 low-income people, and an estimated 70% were under the age of 12. Martino Taylor claims they all unknowingly inhaled this compound morning, noon, and night, so the government could measure its effects on their lungs.
So this was in violation of all medical ethics, all international codes, and the military's own policy at that time.
And Venezuelan leader Hugo Chavez has once again accused the United States of playing God. This time it's Haiti's disastrous earthquake that he thinks the U.S. was behind. Spanish newspaper ABC quotes Chavez as saying that the U.S. Navy launched a weapon capable of inducing a powerful earthquake off the shore of Haiti. He adds that this time it was only a drill, and the final target is destroying and taking over Iran.
A wild accusation from Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. He says Western countries are causing drought in certain parts of the world, including Iran. He says they're using high-tech equipment to drain raindrops from clouds. He basically says European countries are stealing rain from Iran for their own use.
You know, they were talking about climate change yesterday, and now we're learning that scientists and researchers are looking at how to change the weather on purpose. That's right.
lasers now could one day manipulate rain and lightning.
That's right. Well, as Mark Twain once famously said, everyone complains about the weather, but no one ever does anything about it. Well, instead of doing a rain dance, we physicists are firing trillion-watt lasers into the sky to actually precipitate rain clouds and actually bring down lightning bolts. When you have water vapor and you have dust particles or ice crystals, you can precipitate rain. It condenses around the seeds. These seeds can also be created by laser beams. By firing trillion-watt lasers, you rip apart the electrons, creating what are called ions, bringing down rain and even lightning.
I remember reading the stories that China had used this during the Olympics, that the USSR had used this after Chernobyl to create rain clouds. I mean, did those really work then? We have some of these capabilities now?
Inconclusive. Even in the 60s, the CIA used this to bring down monsoons during the Vietnam War. Governments have been playing with this thing.
Alleged to.
Alleged to, right.
Yeah.
Now, we realize that for decades now, these governments have been alleged to have experimented with weather control, but nothing conclusive. We're actually using trillion-watt lasers now. They precipitate rain out of water vapor. Sure enough, you can actually bring down electricity down the beam. The bad news is, if it's a clear blue sky, it's not going to do anything at all, because it only takes water vapor that's already in the air and condenses it. However, you name it, outdoor events and agriculture and flooding and even hurricanes, all of them could be subject to weather modification.
Terrorists no longer the CIA's only priority. The U.S. intel agency now investing in weather?
Well, they're looking into something called climate engineering or geoengineering, which is a way to manipulate the climate to mitigate the effects of global warming. And they think that maybe this might pose a national security threat in the form of exacerbating water shortages or causing more regional instability in places like Darfur or in India-Pakistan region, in the Kashmir region. So they want to find ways of mitigating climate change, and they're investigating, are there possible ways of doing that? Scientists have been researching this have been thinking about this for quite some time. There are two general ways of engineering the climate. One is called solar radiation management, which is putting particles into the atmosphere. So like if you think of a volcano explodes and it releases particles and that cools down the planet. So that's one way. You can put a balloon up in the atmosphere and spray particles. And then another way would be to possibly bring down carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere in a process called carbon capture and storage. They're basically funding research by the National Academy of Sciences.
Okay, so the CIA is not trying to control the weather. We've tried that before and it doesn't really work, but they're trying to impact climate change.
They want to have a lot of tools in the arsenal in case climate change is as bad as some scientists believe it is. They want to have a way of mitigating it.
You told one of our producers at this point it's pretty doubtful this is a viable terror threat right now.
I don't see I don't see the CIA. I don't think that it's going to be an immediate threat. It's definitely something that's going to be a long-term, decades down the line sort of thing.
Well, there you go.
Another example is the array of technologies, often referred to collectively as geoengineering. One that has gained my personal attention is stratospheric aerosol injection, or SAI, a method of seeding the stratosphere with particles that can help reflect the sun's heat in much the same way that volcanic eruptions do. An SAI program could limit global temperature increases, reducing some risks associated with higher temperatures and providing the world economy additional time to transition from fossil fuels. This process is also relatively inexpensive. The National Research Council estimates that a fully deployed SAI program would cost about $10 billion yearly. Now, I could go on and on and on and on about the things that fascinate me, but rather than talk about them, I thought I'd stop here.
Thank you, Senator. The Air Force has gotten great value out of HAARP in the past. We took over from the Navy and managed it and actually did a number of experiment campaigns up there and have finished our work that we're interested in doing up there. We've moving on to other ways of managing the ionosphere, which the HAARP was really designed to do, was to inject energy into the ionosphere to be able to actually control it. But that work has been completed. The Air Force has maintained the site for other government agencies to use for several years now. And with DARPA completing their project, that's our last government customer that we have in the site. We have put out a call for other agencies that had interest in managing the site or taking it over, and including going out to academia.
international corporations are modifying our weather all the time, and they're modifying it in ways that cover thousands and thousands of square miles. Programs are impacting microclimates needed for our crops to survive and needed for pollination. The other issue is that a lot of times we're talking about mitigation for climate change. It's rather an undefined term at this period of time. And so what happens is that many times we're talking about artificially putting chemicals like sulfur or particulates into the atmosphere in what they call geoengineering schemes to reduce, supposedly, global warming. And if you take and you put up into our skies chemicals to reduce the amount of sunlight reaching the earth, you are going to begin to reduce crop production. Without the process of photosynthesis, whereby plants from direct sunlight gain the energy to grow, to produce crops, we are going to find ourselves, if we mitigate in that direction, impacting the crop production not only here in the United States, but worldwide. What you're seeing now, a lot of times many scientists know, especially at NASA and in other areas, that the skies that we're seeing are not normal cloud formations. These are man-made. In California, the State Department of Health drinking water tests were examined between 1970 and this year, and we found unusual spiking in barium, aluminum, strontium, manganese, and all of these spiked at the same time in various drinking water supplies across the state of California and also in Arizona. So what's happening with these atmospheric tests is that aluminum, as one example, gets into the root systems of our trees, and it looks like the trees are dying of drought, but they're not. Many of our forests in Redding, California and other areas are dying from warmer temperatures produced by persistent jet contrails, also impacting tree health and crop health. They know from scientific studies back in the 1970s that they deplete beneficial ozone in the atmosphere by releasing nitric acid.
The death dumps, otherwise known as chemical trails, are being dropped and sprayed throughout the United States, in England, Scotland, Ireland, Northern Europe, and I have personally seen them not only in the United States, but in Mexico and Canada. Birds are dying around the world. Fish are dying by the hundreds of thousands around the world. This is genocide. This is poison. This is murder by the United Nations. This element within our society that's doing this must be stopped. I personally have observed the planes in Lincoln, Nebraska at the Air National Guard. They have no markings on them. They're huge, bomber-like airplanes with no markings. This is a crime. Crime against humanity, crime against America, crime against the citizens of this great country. What is wrong with Congress? This has an effect on their population and their people and their friends and their relatives and themselves. What's wrong with the pilots who are flying these airplanes? They're dumping this crap, this poison, on their own families. Somebody in Congress has to step forward and stop it now. Thank you. I'm Ted Gunderson.
I conducted air sampling, I conducted soil sampling, and I was getting high levels of these contaminants. When I started asking the question again under a new commander, I never in my life thought I would have somebody look me in the face and tell me, "Is there something wrong with you? You've been looking really depressed lately. You know I can put you under a mental evaluation for up to 120 days. Who would take care of your daughter?" Because I was divorced at the time. As soon as I heard that, I knew. It validated everything I ever thought. And I thought, I've spent 9 years of my life trying to protect human health, and here we are, violating law after law after law. Just sitting here, instead of protecting the people, we are poisoning the people. And you ask yourself, if this is true and we are spraying the people, where are the pilots? Where are the people? I don't know if you pay attention, but look at Snowden. Look at Manning. People don't come forward because these supposed Whistleblower Act protections that you have are not enforced, they're not supported, and they really don't exist. Geoengineering is occurring, it's been occurring, it is not new, and your tax dollars are funding this. So it is unethical every day for all the other people that are out there that work in preventive health, or even physicians that aren't speaking about this. They need to. The biggest hurdle that we have is disinformation sites. I never say them, but I'm going to today, so that you know if anyone ever gives these to you as a reference to debunk you, it's Metabunk, and Contrail Science. Those are two websites that are ran by a government shill named Mick West. He is a computer gaming programmer who tries to tell you about persistent contrails. So somebody who isn't even credentialed in chemistry or physics or ecology, none of that, is trying to tell you that you're crazy. You have to understand that I have met people who used to be purposeful disinformation trolls, as we call them. These people are paid to get you on board to believe a website or an article. So I just want everyone to know and understand that of all things, of all the freedoms that we are losing, geoengineering is the #1 issue that we are facing. Because you can have guns and money and you can have everything. If you don't have food and water and you are dying of respiratory or neurological illnesses, what does it matter? So you've heard about vaccines and you'll hear, about smart meters and you'll hear about other issues. These are all systemic effects. We are getting overexposed to toxins. People will tell you fluoride's in the water, but it's not a lot. It is a lot because you're getting it everywhere in your food, water that you drink, and you're getting it in your vaccines. Our bodies cannot metabolize these toxins.
There's the debate. Is it a condensation trail or a chemical trail, something with an additive in it? And I couldn't bite the chemical trail issue for a long time. Give me a reason. Give me a motive.